Welcome to the program. I'm Dr. Justin Sung. I'm the head of learning at I Can Study, and you're going to see a lot of me as you go through the course. I wanted to spend a little bit of time to tell you about how the course is structured and exactly what you can expect. The first thing that I want to say is that the system and the techniques that we teach you, especially those relating specifically to learning skills, are more of a revolution than an evolution. What that means is that it's not simply an iteration of an existing way of doing things. One of the things that we noticed was that a lot of the common techniques and advice that's given builds on just what is the conventional, normal way of doing things. However, the underlying research or the theories and the practices that it was built on are fundamentally flawed or just frankly not as well supported as it's made out to be. This is a problem that I realized in my own practice several years ago and while I was teaching students how to learn effectively. I needed to increase my own learning efficiency. My students needed to do better as well. And so I started looking at the research for the first time to try to increase my own abilities and build my own system. I trawled through the research and I started looking at what works. Rather than thinking about what I'm already doing and building off of it, I decided to just start from zero and think, what works right now, and can we build a system from just what works, disregarding all the things that don't work? Initially, I never intended to really do this full time. I never intended to have a YouTube channel where I teach it. But because I didn't look at it like a studying influencer where I was just taking some theories and making a video about it to get views, and because I wasn't trying to sell it initially and create like a package that's really marketable and sellable, because I was looking at it purely in terms of delivering effective outcomes for myself and my immediate students, the techniques and the system that ended up being created that you're going to learn are very different to what is normally given out there and what is normally recommended. You'll notice that many of the approaches and the systems and the techniques take a different angle on processing information or writing notes or how you can set yourself up for academic success. And it will probably align with your own lived experience more closely than conventional advice as well. But it will be different. And so I just want you to expect that. I want you to expect that it's going to be different. And the reason it's different is because it's not just an iteration of the same thing that fundamentally is going in the wrong direction. It is a refresh, looking at what works and building a system from that instead of just creating new band-aid solutions on top of programs that don't work. So the end result and the system that you will be learning is, to the best of my knowledge, a world's first. It is a fully integrated, cross-domain, highly transferable system of learning. What that means is that each technique does not sit alone. Each technique influences the other techniques to form an entire overall system of learning. The weaknesses of one technique are caught by the strengths of another technique, and only in conjunction do they achieve the total overall effect. It's very common for me to see people talking about specific isolated techniques that sound good and flashy, but in the real world simply do not stand up or get the results as consistently as they should because of the fact that another aspect of the learning process was overlooked. That's not going to be the case with this system. It's also cross-domain. And what that means is that you can apply these skills for multiple different subjects and topics and purposes. The skills we're teaching you are highly transferable. They're relevant for a middle school, high school, university, postgraduate, PhD, postdoctoral student. They're relevant for a professional that's trying to recertify or trying to fit in some studying while they're working full-time. They're appropriate for people trying to gain new skills or go back to study after a long time spent away from formal education. It's appropriate for all of these instances. You can use this for a huge variety of topics. You can use it for biology, chemistry, physics, the sciences. You can use it for politics, economics, legal studies and law. You can use it for learning languages, learning business, accounting. There's an enormous range of applicability, and we will teach you a little bit more about how you can use it and how you can adapt it. And also, as you learn more, it will come to make more sense why these skills are so transferable and why it's so possible to extend them. And the other aspect is that this is a high consistency system. What that means is that when you apply the techniques in the way that it is taught and practice it in the way that we recommend, the results you get are fairly predictable. We do anticipate that anyone that learns these techniques should reasonably expect a fairly significant improvement in their learning efficiency. It took several years of experimentation and data collection and trial and error before we even launched this program to begin with. And at the moment that we launched it, we were already getting around an 80% and above success rate in terms of people that are able to take these skills and really apply them and get the results that we expect. And it's actually only gotten higher since then. However, because it is a world's first system, it isn't something that is a walk in the park. If it was really easy to learn and really easy to pick up, not only would everyone already do it, but it would also probably be something that you yourself already learned ages ago. This would be something that was disseminated decades ago. However, it's not. It's something that is very, very precise and very, very specific. There are hundreds, potentially thousands of interactions and relationships between each individual concept and principle. A single technique could be the culmination of years of trial and error to get a technique that produces such a predictable cognitive effect that it can be placed in the system to then influence the other techniques in such a precise way that it creates this chain reaction of cognitive effects that allows you to achieve the results that we think that you should expect to achieve. And an unfortunate consequence of the complexity of the system and of each of the techniques is that there is frankly a very high chance of error and making certain mistakes. And therefore, one of the things we have is a lot of feedback and support mechanisms that are available for you to access. Feedback is extremely, extremely important. If you just try to go through the course material by yourself, I can really promise you, without any doubt, you will not be able to use the techniques correctly. Maybe a couple decades from now, we will have cracked the code in terms of how we can teach it in such a way that it doesn't even require feedback. But as it is now, it's very nuanced and it does take an experienced eye to help you through each process. So we've got a team of coaches that are extremely thoroughly trained to help you walk through it step by step. So please do utilize that feedback. It's for your own success. And the other, I guess, sort of unfortunate consequence is that it has to be done sequentially. Please go through the course very, very carefully. What we've noticed in some cases is that if there's a technique that you've partially already sort of started using, there is a tendency that you may actually ignore some of the very small nuances about how we teach that technique. And again, that becomes important because mastery of that very specific way of doing it is necessary to build on it later when we upgrade that to a more advanced level of the skill. It's a sequential process where you have to have each individual step completed before moving on to the next. If you skip steps, if you don't take steps seriously, if you do not practice a step, you will fail to learn the techniques. It is not a walk in the park. You do have to put in effort. This is not a magic solution to all of the problems. It is a path that is laid out there. And the path does lead to a system and a solution that will solve many of your problems. And that is a bold claim that I'm confident to make. But the path is not wide and extremely forgiving. So we have done our best to arrange the course and the instructions in such a way where it is very clear what you should do and what your expectations are at each stage of the progression. But it is up to you and your own sense of responsibility to take that seriously, not rush ahead and not skip things. And we have tested hundreds of other different sequence pathways to see if it allows someone to develop the skill more quickly or efficiently. This is the fastest and most efficient we've been able to get it, at least at this level of consistency and predictability. Now, a common question that people often have when they come into the course is, how much time do I need to spend? You may have already seen that we have some tools that allow you to predict how much practice you need. And this is an important distinction, is that there is theory time and there is practice time. Theory time is the amount of time that you will spend on learning a new technique, listening to me explain something. It's important not to confuse theory time with practice time. Practice time is a time that you spend on trying to apply the theory and gain competency over the skill. Just like how you can't read a manual on how to play a sport or an instrument, and then therefore go and play the sport and instrument to an expert level, you shouldn't expect that you can use the technique just because you understand it and feel like you get it. That is an extremely dangerous path to go down, and it's often called the illusion of fluency or the illusion of competency. As human beings, we tend to overestimate our ability to execute on certain skills and underestimate the procedural difficulty, especially when it comes to something like learning, where it's not easy to see where the mistakes are because it's all happening in your brain. For feedback purposes especially, it's important that we're able to see how you're progressing as you're practicing. We generally recommend for each hour of theory, you complement that with 5 hours minimum of practice. Now, if you plan to get through 1 hour of theory per week, it doesn't mean that you need to dedicate another 5 hours of special practice time. Normally, you'll be in an environment where you're already studying or working or trying to learn anyway. All you have to do is replace the techniques you're already using. We don't recommend that you just clear the slate completely, start from zero, and then just build the techniques with what we teach you. The way we've designed this program is for people that are busy, that are time poor, and the idea is to swap out parts of your technique. So the time that you're spending studying or learning in whatever setting is already being spent. It's just about how we're spending that time that will start changing. So you're not spending any extra time, or at least not much extra time, but you are getting more practice under your belt. And as we go, we just continue to swap and replace and upgrade parts of your system until eventually your entire system has been completely upgraded again and again and again. If you have a study system that is kind of doing something for you already, and we replace parts of it, then we can just continue to make progress. But if you get rid of everything and we teach you this technique, which isn't designed to fill this gap, then that means that you're going to have a gap there and your results may actually go down. We don't want that. And finally, as I mentioned before, there are so many ways that you can get feedback and support throughout your journey. But you have to put yourself in a position where it's possible to give you feedback. We're not going to magically know what you're doing and where you're struggling unless you ask us and unless you engage and reach out. We have so many methods of getting support that there's no good reason whatsoever for you to not be able to reach out and get the support that you need. So get frequent feedback, get frequent support. We like it when our students are constantly engaging with us and trying to, improve themselves. We like working with people that are driven and proactive and want help and are really obviously making that effort to create that change. We don't like people that have a superiority complex and sit back and think, I can just smash through this by myself. I don't need help. We have worked with thousands of students from around the world. None of those students do well. In fact, there's often a very significant difference in skill level between the ones that kind of just stay by themselves versus the ones that truly open-mindedly and humbly engage with the team. So to summarize, welcome to the program. It's going to be a transformative journey. It's a revolution, not an evolution. So expect that things are going to be different. Expect to be challenged and expect that it is a road that you do have to put in the effort to walk down. Each step is designed very specifically after years of experience. Please follow the instructions carefully. Do not skip steps and do not rush. Make sure that you're getting sufficient practice for the theory that you're taking in. Don't overload the theory and then underload the practice. It's much better to do it the other way around. And at any time throughout your journey, if you need help, put yourself in that position where we can help you. I'm sure that this program is going to blow you away, and I'm personally excited to see the progress that you make and be a part of that journey with you. We're going to get started now with some of our rapid start modules, which is designed to get you rapidly started. You're going to be seeing a lot of me throughout the course, so I thought I'd hand it over to Archer, who is one of our experienced mentors and student advisors. He's going to take you through some of these very important modules to start with, and then you'll see me a lot more in the rest of the course. So I'll see you soon.
Thanks, Justin, and hi Hi, as Justin said, my name is Archer. I'm an I Can Study mentor and student advisor, and my job is to really make sure that you get the most out of this course. If you're able to learn a lot and succeed, that means that we've done our job. When you win, we win, and so it's my job to get you there. To get you started, I want to let you know about some of the most important techniques that every single student on this course should know about. Without these, winning is going to be a very long and tiring struggle. If you have ever felt like you've never had enough time, or you have a really busy day, and despite that, you get nothing actually important done, then these techniques are going to help you fix that. If you're able to use some of these techniques, you'll notice that the time that you spend will be more meaningful. You're able to be more motivated, and it would actually give you the time you need to focus on the other skills that we'll be teaching throughout this course. But what you'll realize is, or maybe you already realize, is that if you don't work on the skills you need to become more efficient now early on, it may be too late by the time that you need it. Sometimes investing time into something now is going to be that thing that saves you time later on. After all, we've always known that efficiency is a key factor of creating success. I'm reminded of a quote from Henry Ford, the founder of Ford Company, and what he said is that if I had asked people what they really wanted, they would have asked for faster horses. And I think this really summarizes how often we can get so invested in what we have right now that we don't even think about the change that could change the game entirely. I'm sure that the people who are laying roads for the horses, making better horse saddles, or finding the better ways of grooming a horse would have been far too busy to build a car. So if you're really busy with studying and trying to learn using the current techniques that you have, you're so busy that you can't even work on the course, then that is the biggest sign that you even have to work on this course even more. If we're too busy with what doesn't work, we'll never have time to learn what does work. And I can guarantee you that if you change nothing, nothing will change. You can't solve the problem the same way that you created the problem. So let's get into a few quick modules to get you building your car, fixing the problem, and changing what needs to be changed. I've mentioned before that feeling of being really busy, but not actually feeling like you're getting anything important done. Sometimes it can feel like the work is just never ending and that you'll never be able to get on top of it. This is something that, can make us feel anxious and overwhelmed. And I know this really well. So does Justin. So does the rest of the team. The reason that you might be feeling this way is due to something that we called urgency trapping. Figuring out what tasks you should do and balancing this around everything that you've got is something that we call task management. And this is very different from time management, which is really about putting this onto a schedule and making sure that we get things done on a weekly or daily basis. But just because we have a schedule doesn't mean that we've used our time in the most wise way possible. If we have bad task management, even with the most perfect schedule, we might not be spending our time on the right things. And this is a concept widely called task prioritization, and we'll be referring to this as just prioritization from now on. Now, there's something about the human brain that most people don't realize, and that's that our human brain is really bad at prioritizing for the modern day. The brain adapted not knowing if we'd be able to find enough food to allow us to survive until the next week. And so our brain is really bad at prioritizing things to the medium to long term. So what does this mean and why is this important? Well, it's because now when we're thinking about, relying on our intuition or our gut feeling to prioritize something, then if we do that, it's probably going to be wrong. Our brain is wired to feel that tasks that are urgent are definitely the most important tasks that should be done. But this isn't always the case. And an example of this is homework. Homework is always going to be urgent. There's always a close deadline just so that you can get that completed with the thought that, your teacher's going to be happy with your progress. So your parents and yourself that you're keeping up with the work. But homework itself is never really going to be so important that it's going to fundamentally change the grade that you're going to get in the next test. This is usually nothing compared to spending that time instead focusing in on identifying your weaknesses upcoming to a test or exam and actually addressing those up front rather than expecting a homework sheet or something like that to predict it for you. Compare this to working on our study skills or our time management skills. Let's say that it takes 15 minutes a day for a month to work on study skills up to a point where it's really, really helping us and we've saved a lot of time. That feels a lot less urgent. And so you're more than likely to put that off. Months can go by and we're still putting it off. And if we find that, the workload starts to increase or studying gets harder, then we actually get trapped. If only we spent that time to develop the skills to free ourselves, but by then it's really too late. Or another example, in early 2021, we had a lot of professionals in their late 20s to early 30s reach out to us and to Justin. Why? Well, because of COVID, a lot of jobs were at risk and people felt the need to learn new skills to be able to find them new jobs. In this situation, someone who spent the time to learn new skills after work each day was in a dramatically better position than someone who waited just until they were fired to learn new skills. There's a saying that says, luck is when opportunity meets preparation. An opportunity that is presented to someone who's not prepared, it's far more likely that that can be wasted and slip by. However, the same opportunity presented to someone who is more prepared, it can actually change their life. So you can see that there are very important things in our lives that are completely not urgent. And if we only think about it when it is urgent, then it's too late. Students that ask us for help with an exam 1 week out from when it happens, look, there's really nothing that we can do and their grade cannot be of help anymore. And so this is that concept that we call urgency trapping. It's when you schedule all your time focusing on the things that are urgent, rather than those things that are not urgent and even more important for setting up your life. Those of you who may have heard of the Eisenhower Matrix may find this familiar, but even still, we have students who have had whole workshops on prioritization and Eisenhower Matrix who still fall into urgency trapping. We talk about this a lot more going through the course, so don't worry about that. So how do we get over urgency trapping? One of the things that we can do is think about how we can split up our time when developing a new skill or some knowledge. And we can think about splitting it up into theory time and practice time. An example of this may be that you may spend 20 minutes to learn a new recipe to bake this cake, but it still might take you 20 tries of practice to get it good. Or maybe it may take you even more. So when you start thinking about the time spent practicing using these study skills versus learning new study skills, we want to make sure that this is a minimum of a 5-to-1 ratio. For every minute learning a new study technique, you want to be practicing it for at least 5 minutes. Now this can go all the way up to a 40-to-1 ratio as well. So for every minute that you're spending learning new techniques, you might be practicing for 40 minutes. Another example of this is, let's say that you're picking up the guitar for the first time. It may take you 15 minutes to understand how the fretboard works and where you need to place your fingers, or even, how to hold a pick. But it can take months, if not even years, to know how to use all these things simultaneously. So, some of the cognitive skills that we may teach you on this course may only take 20 minutes to properly understand, but it can take from 3 to 4 hours, or maybe even 30 to 40 hours of proper practice to really be at the point where you've got mastery with it. So, it's important to balance our progress with practice, and this is for 2 reasons. By having that progress, we can make sure that we don't get demotivated and we don't feel like we're stagnating with that progress. And also, we want to make sure that we have that practice so that we're not going to just be learning too many things too quickly, juggling with too many techniques that we're not even sure about how to really apply them. If you're learning more new techniques than you're actually using them, you might actually slow yourself down even more, overwhelming yourself, and actually cause you to retain less. So what I'm trying to say here is it's not only important to understand the content we're teaching you, but to actually practice it and get good with it. Knowing it is one thing, but being able to do it well, being able to master it is a completely different thing. Now, when it comes to the calendar, which is a staple of getting good time management skills, we want to think about where can we put these tasks. It is usually best to put important and not urgent tasks near the start of our day where we don't feel overwhelmed, we don't feel pressed for time. So for example, this may be looking at some of the study skills. It may be looking into a little bit of the theory about how to play guitar or how to play music. Now for some people, this works really well in the morning before class or for work, but it may be actually better for you if it's straight after getting home and having that break. Now the thing is here, if we put important but not urgent tasks near the end of our day, you would absolutely never get it done. If we put urgent tasks earlier, then that important but not urgent task will just be put off to the next day. If we think about it, it actually doesn't work any other way. If we are not scheduling our day by the most important things rather than the most urgent, then we're always going to be not doing the most important stuff. If we schedule our days by importance, it means that even if we didn't get everything done in a day like we intended, we would have got the most important stuff done. We would have done the things that are going to have the biggest impact for us long term. If we just focus on urgent tasks all the time, we're going to be swimming and just trying to keep our head above water at all times, trying not to drown. And it may feel that this is very counterintuitive, but as we mentioned, we're not really good at prioritizing for the medium or long term. But when you begin to apply this, it just starts to make sense why it makes so much of a difference. And as you follow these guidelines, you'll find that the work that you're doing is going to be far more fulfilling, meaningful, impactful, and it's just going to be far more motivating. As you may remember, I mentioned that having a calendar is one of the staples in getting on top of managing your time more efficiently. So in this video, we're going to be focusing on how can you actually set up Google Calendar to kind of begin applying some of these principles and actually make it work for you based off all of your circumstances that you have. So let's jump into Google Calendar and take a look at this. Okay, so I've got a pretty basic calendar here based off what I had in year 12. As you can see, there are just some time blocks set aside for the classes that I had to be at. And it's really important as well to have the time to accommodate for travel. The first thing that you want to put on your Google Calendar are the non-negotiable events that you're going to have to be at. So for example, classes for school, family birthday, soccer training. I have to go to these. So these are events. Put those in there and then you can work around that to fit your tasks amongst all of this. It also puts in perspective how much time or lack of time you actually have. So you may start to think about all the tasks you want to do. You have an assignment coming up, a test, some study you have to do. You think about how can you fit this in here? But the main thing that we spoke about in the last video is we want to put the important stuff first. So that may include doing a little bit of I Can Study. I'll tell you a little bit about how to use Google Calendar in this video, but this won't be anything comprehensive on it. We're really looking at about how can we apply, some of these time management principles, but it's pretty easy. All you have to do is just drag on the screen as large as you want to make it, and then you get a little window that pops up and you can type in the event that you want to create for yourself. So what I'm setting up here is just 30 minutes of time where I'm going to solely focus on I Can Study. Now, on a Friday, I might actually be too tired, so I'm not going to schedule that in. We just want to make sure that important task is scheduled in, and we're going to do our best to actually make sure that can happen before we start to worry about those urgent tasks. For example, homework, preparing for that upcoming test. Not everything has to be scheduled into your calendar. We're not robots, but this is just to get started with using this a little bit more intentionally so that you can have more control over your time. The good thing about Google Calendar is you can set up recurring events, so not everything is so arduous and time consuming. So for example, I'm setting up a travel block here. I'm going to click more options, and this allows me to repeat this, and I'm going to do this every weekday, Monday to Friday. And that custom option that you saw there as well is very useful. There you go, and now you can see that's going to show up every week. Some quick buttons just to show you around. You can go to the next week, previous week, you can click on today. There's different views. You can go to the day view, you can go to the week view, depending on what you like best. I find that week is nice to see the bigger picture of what's going on. So now at this point, you have those non-negotiable events that you have to be at, and you've got some time set aside for travel, but as well those important but not urgent tasks. Now you have to start thinking, how are you going to fit in the time to get the urgent things done? Well, what you may see here is that for Thursday, which is today, I've only got 2 hours before I have that family birthday. So 2 hours is not a lot of time. So I have to prioritize the most important and most urgent task that needs to go here because I'm not going to be able to do everything. And I also have to start estimating how long something's going to take. So if I think it's going to take me an hour to get through all my homework, we want to overestimate this by a good maybe 30 minutes, just in case, because we always go overtime with tasks. Now, by having this all down on the calendar and making a conscious decision, we can make sure that we're not falling victim to some of our human tendencies and thinking that everything that is urgent is important. This allows us to take that bigger picture overview of what's going on in our life, and so that we can prioritize the things that make the most impact. From here, I might just schedule in that I'm going to be working on my English essay. So even though I have 2 hours blocked aside now, it doesn't mean that I'm going to use that time wisely. So I need to make sure that I have an intention set about what's going to be done in this 2 hours. So I'm going to have a specific and measurable intention set here. It's going to be specific because I'm going to say I'm going to get 2 paragraphs done that are roughly 250 words each. And this specific goal is going to be measurable because I will know if I've written down 500 words. That can stop a lot of the procrastination in a lot of cases and actually set you up so that you can be productive in this time because you'll know if you hit your goal or not. This video is just going to be a very brief introduction about how to start using a digital calendar, which is far more flexible and it tends to be a lot easier to use. I'm going to be using Google Calendar, and Justin does as well. It kind of just has everything that you really need when you're getting started out with this. You can use any calendar that you want, but it doesn't really matter as long as you're applying some of the time management principles that we talked about. Cool, so now you have a little bit more of an idea, more of a plan about how you're going to be spending your time, and everything has been time blocked so far. We'll look at different ways about how to go about this, but for now, this is a great place to begin. Here is a list of the techniques that you can do to prevent procrastination. See which of these techniques you're not using and try them out. Most of the things will be taught again later in the course and more advanced versions of it. This is just a list to kind of get you started. When you feel like procrastinating, make a list of tasks. Breaking down an abstract task into smaller steps can make it seem a lot more doable, naturally reducing your urge to procrastinate. Set yourself up. This means put away those distracting tabs, those windows on your computer, put your phone on silent, put it away, and also start to load up your work or get out your textbooks. You don't actually have to go and do it. You can set all of it up and then pack it up again and go back to procrastinating. But just by doing this, you may feel inclined to get some work done and might actually end up doing it. You can do this step by step, closing each tab at a time, and you can just focus only on doing this very, very slowly. Get started beforehand. Allow those completionist and perfectionist tendencies to fight off that procrastination for you. Get started on some work the night before, even if it's just a few minutes. The point isn't to do it to a good standard, but the next day, knowing that you have this unfinished piece of work can be enough for you to get started instead of putting it off. Even if it's just a little, an unfinished piece of work is always easier to get started than starting on something completely fresh and new. Group up and find some friends to create a focus session. And sometimes that social pressure can actually be a good thing to get you going. And the last one is to aim for your personal best. Sometimes our sense of perfectionism can get in the way of us even getting started. We feel that if we can't do it perfectly, then we won't want to get started at all. Instead of aiming for perfect, aim for your personal best. Whether that mean the best usage of this technique that you're learning, the best effort that you've put into something, or the best time taken. Whatever it is, aim for a PB. You can even be creative in trying to figure out what different types of personal bests you want to be aiming for. You know, work doesn't always have to be a drag. We can make it more of a game to make it more fun. Okay, so this is just a super quick introduction into some of these techniques. We'll continue to develop these and work on them as we go through the course.
Hey there. Hey, you. Yes, you. Do you sometimes sit there aiming to study, but then land on your phone and scroll through Facebook or Instagram or YouTube or chat with your friends for 15 minutes and then another 15 minutes and then another 15 minutes? And now it's time to have dinner. And then it's kind of like, well, I don't have enough time anyway. I might as well do it tomorrow. If this sounds like you, then you might suffer from procrastination. But you probably already knew that. And we're going to be talking about the first steps that you can take to really putting a damper on procrastination. Now, I need to tell you something first, is that most people look at procrastination completely the wrong way, and they try to overcome it in a very, very unsustainable way. In fact, so much so that the research actually shows that trying to overcome procrastination this way is extremely ineffective compared to the alternative. So I'm going to teach you about how most people do it, then I'm going to teach you about the alternative, and you're going to realize how little sense that it makes. This may be something that's familiar to you if you've already seen previous videos by me. It's a topic that I've talked about a lot. So if you have, then this would be a good recap for you. But if you haven't, this is going to flip your perspective of procrastination completely on its head. So let's start with a story of Jack. So this is Jack. Jack's a good boy. Obviously, he's a cool kid. He's wearing his cap backwards, and he looks quite happy with himself. And he's happy with himself because he's highly motivated to achieve a very specific goal. And let's represent that goal once again with this star. And this goal for him, let's just give it a name. Let's say that he aims to be a doctor. Okay? But it could be a lawyer, an engineer, it could be just a rich billionaire, philanthropist, crime-fighting Batman, whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. The idea is that Jack, in this case, for example, he wants to be a doctor. And so he realizes that to achieve this goal, or this goal, or this goal, or this goal, it's going to take a lot of hard work. But he is extremely motivated to do that work and put in the effort. So he is really, really motivated. And what he does is that he's going to sit down and he's going to create himself a plan. He's going to make a schedule. He's going to go ahead and create a timetable on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. He's going to write down his goals on like a vision board so that he knows exactly what he's aiming for. He's going to stick up posters on the wall so he keeps himself nice and motivated. Then he's going to get to work, right? So it's day one of his journey, and he is full of fire, okay? This fire represents his fire of motivation and passion. And because of that, he's going to start working very, very hard. And because he's working very, very hard, what does he see? What he sees is progress and results. And that's the important part, is that he's seeing his progress. And so that is actually making him even more motivated because he realizes that when he puts in hard work and effort, he's getting some good results. But then time goes on a little bit. And as you know, when time goes on, motivation tends to fade a little. And the other thing, more dangerously, is that as time goes on, the progress starts becoming a little bit uncertain. We're not really sure where the progress is being made. We don't know whether we're getting better, whether we're getting worse, whether we're staying the same, whether we're on the right track. Because of the fact that we're further along in our journey, it's harder to tell how our day-to-day actions are taking us towards this big, ambitious goal that we initially set out to achieve, that we were really motivated for. And as a result, because he's not able to see his results, his motivation is actually going down even more. And so a spiral forms. More time passes, the results become more ambiguous. He's putting in lots of effort, but he's not sure whether it's working. Sometimes he feels like it is, sometimes he feels like it isn't, and ultimately his motivation suffers as well. And he goes through this cycle again and again and again, until one day he realizes that actually his motivation has gone down so low and he's ended up procrastinating. He didn't used to procrastinate, but now he does. He procrastinates, he doesn't get stuff done, and overall his productivity is taking a plummet. It's going all the way down. But the thing is, he doesn't notice that initially. And it goes on and on and on until one day he realizes, man, this is becoming a real problem. If this keeps up, I might not actually reach this goal. So he kicks himself and he reignites that fire. He injects a bunch of energy into this. And he says, I am going to pump up my fire of motivation once again. And he fuels up his motivation. And so his motivation is now really high again. He feels great. He feels pumped. He's ready to do the work. And now we're back here. He's pumped. He's motivated. Therefore, he is more productive. Okay, therefore, he's productive. He's putting in the results, and maybe they're not so visible, but he knows that consistency is the key, so he's doing that. But invariably, time passes again, and the same cycle repeats. His motivation goes down, and then he becomes less productive. And then he realizes that he's possibly completely screwed, and his motivation goes up again. He's more productive, so on and so forth. So this is a very common cycle. How many of you can relate to this cycle of motivation where you're really, really motivated and you get a lot done, and then sometimes you're really not motivated and you don't get anything done, and then you get motivated again and you're really productive, and then you're not, and then you are, and then you're not, and then you are. So what happens is that constantly what's happening is that your motivation is going up and down, and what's happening is that your productivity is going up and down with it. And so at the end of the day, you become really worried because your motivation is always going up and down, and you start thinking, what is wrong with me? Why can I not just maintain my motivation? Why am I always struggling? And so we start getting more demoralized. We start thinking, maybe I'm just not cut out for it. Maybe I just can't. How do I motivate myself? And we start becoming pretty desperate. And in that desperation, we go and watch more motivational and inspirational videos. We start, in my situation, I ingested motivational videos as if it was like cocaine, basically. I was like addicted to it. I used to wake up listening to motivational videos because that was the only thing that would motivate me to get out of bed many years ago. So this is obviously very demoralizing, right? I mean, we're in this pit where we're constantly feeling motivated and demotivated and motivated and demotivated. And it gets to a point where even when we're motivated, we start being afraid of what happens when this motivation runs out. It's really common for me to talk to students and say, look, I'm really motivated at the moment, but I'm really scared that that's going to run out. And parents will say the same thing. A lot of parents say, yes, my son or daughter or my child is really motivated at the moment, but I'm worried that they're not going to keep themselves accountable. I'm worried that they're going to just sort of fizzle out. And I think a lot of you guys can actually relate to that. So in this situation, if this carries on, Jack's chances of reaching this great goal that he wanted to reach is now at risk. It's now at risk. He may actually not reach it, okay? Something that should have been high chance of success because he was very motivated and clearly willing to put in lots and lots of effort. Now we're thinking, will he actually reach it? Is the effort good enough? So the question to ask in this situation is, where did Jack go wrong? Where did Jack go wrong? Did he go wrong in making bad plans? Did he go wrong in that he didn't make enough progress when he was motivated to offset the times when he's not motivated? Should he have done things here in order to make sure that he could increase his motivation sooner and earlier so he doesn't stay in the slump for too long? These are all very reasonable and very common suggestions, but none of them are actually the right answer, or at least that's what the research shows. See, even if he were able to make himself more motivated over here, over time, inevitably, he will end up going back through the cycle. And the more times you go through the cycle, the more demotivated you become. Because, again, it doesn't really change anything. It's still going up and down. It's just that you might be going up and down much faster, or maybe much slower. But it doesn't change the fact that over time, eventually, at some point, you will end up in this state. And so the issue here is really this cycle. The problem is this cycle. And that cycle is this. The cycle of being really, really motivated initially, getting lots of stuff done, being highly productive, getting stuff on your to-do list done, having schedules that you're following, and then over time that fizzles out. And then you just feel, like a melted potato. And you just kind of exist. And then eventually you think, oh man, I'm really falling behind now. And then you're hyped up again and you create more motivation. The problem is this cycle. The problem is this cycle. As long as this cycle continues, the problem will always exist. What we need to do is we need to break this cycle. Because eventually what happens when you do this cycle for long enough is that you don't do this step again. What happens is instead, you eventually will just burn out. Because there's nothing left to reignite. You've done that cycle for so long that instead you're sick of it. You don't have enough energy left, and eventually you just burn out. So what initially was really, really productive up here, and then fluctuatingly productive, and then eventually you just can't be bothered anymore, and you sort of flatline. And this is what we call burnout. And burnout is something that we definitely want to avoid. So where did Jack actually go wrong? Where did Jack go wrong in this story? What did he do wrong? What would you do differently? The thing is that the area that Jack went wrong on was not on having a high goal. Good on him for having a high goal. The area was that he relied on this motivation. These were the issues. Now you might be thinking, wow, motivation is the problem, but I've always heard that it's good to be motivated. And that's true. It is good to be motivated. Motivation is a driver. It's a fuel. Without the motivation, you don't get and do anything. So the motivation is necessary. You need to be able to evaluate your motivation. You need to be able to critically think about your motivation and reflect on it. These are necessary because when push comes to shove, when things are really, really difficult, when you're having a tough time, when you want to give up, you do need that fire to bring you back again. So that motivation is necessary. The problem is not that the motivation exists. The problem is that Jack's entire system of productivity relied on being motivated. It relied on being motivated. And here's the thing with motivation that most people, especially young people, don't understand, is that motivation is very multifactorial. Motivation is extremely multifactorial. And what that means is that what contributes to motivation are things like your energy, like your mood, how well you've reflected critically on it. It could depend even on just the people around you, your peers and your peer influence. It could depend on your family, your parents, society, cultural pressures. All these things make up motivation. Motivation doesn't have to be the pure flame of your soul that burns you, the essence of who you are. And research on motivation is very clear in that motivation is multifactorial. There are lots of factors that make up motivation. And the thing is, because there's multiple factors that make up motivation, each of these factors on a daily basis, sometimes even multiple times a day, they go up and down. They go up and down. You might be highly motivated to do well and become the billionaire crime-fighting philanthropist. But if you didn't get enough sleep the night before, on the day, you're not going to be very motivated. It's as simple as that. If your friends suddenly don't all want to become billionaire philanthropists with you, you're going to be less motivated. If something bad happened to you, if your pet died or ran away, you're not motivated to pursue your rich billionaire philanthropist, crime-solving, crime-fighting Batman dreams. So motivation is always going up and down. It's a feature of motivation. It's invariable, okay? So it's a given. Motivation always fluctuates. Motivation always fluctuates because it's made up of multiple things, and all of these things will always fluctuate. So if you're relying on motivation to get stuff done, then you're saying you are relying on something that always inherently goes up and down in order to do stuff consistently. And you can't rely on something that's inherently fluctuant to do something consistently. And this is where most people make a mistake. What they say is, okay, this plan that I create is based on me being highly motivated. But what happens when I'm not motivated? We don't often make plans for when we're not motivated, right? When's the last time you made a plan for when you were not motivated? Not many people do that. And so the issue here, right, is we need to think about it like this. If this is the amount of motivation we have, we know that our motivation is always going up and down, okay? Sometimes it's high, sometimes it's low. So our motivation is always going up and down. This is the trace of our motivation that you can see. This yellow line represents a line in which there is a high necessary amount of motivation. Okay? A high necessary amount of motivation. So this means that we're setting plans that require lots of motivation. So your plan might be, I'm going to wake up at 5 a.m. every single day. I'm going to get all of the study done before school. I'm going to go to school really motivated. I'm going to do this and this. I'm going to pick up a new sport and hobby. I'm going to go home. I'm going to study for 2 hours every single day, blah, 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 all of those sorts of things. That's the type of plan that Jack probably made. But the thing is, that plan requires this much motivation. But we know that motivation is not always going to be this high, which means that your plan would only succeed here, 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 and here. Your plan failed here, 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 and here. So actually, most of the time, your plan failed, which means that overall, you were not consistent. And it's very hard to get so much done in these moments that it actually makes up for just being a little bit less productive, but just consistently so every single day. Let's compare that to this plan under here. This is, as you can guess, a low requirement for motivation. So this is making a plan that doesn't require lots of motivation. These are plans that are very easy to achieve, they're very realistic, and most importantly, you know that you can achieve them even on a bad day. And because you can achieve them on a bad day, hey look, when do we fail this plan? Pretty much never. Every single day we can be consistent. Okay? Sometimes we get dangerously close to not being able to do it, but a low motivation plan means that even though we're not overall as productive every single day, because we're consistent overall, that consistency gives us a much higher level of productivity. And what most people underestimate is that consistency is much more important than bursts. Because if you're able to chip away at something consistently, you build habits out of it. And when you build habits out of something, the amount of motivation required to do it goes down even further. And that's the magic. And this right here, this is the golden formula, is that we want to increase the level of consistency. And by increasing consistency, we increase the development of habits. Habits is equal to doing things on autopilot. It's like brushing your teeth. It's like tying your shoelaces a certain way. It's like walking somewhere that you've walked 100 times and you don't even intend to walk there. You don't even remember how you got there, and you still end up there because the entire journey you were just on autopilot. Autopilot is something that does not require any effort. Autopilot is not something that requires motivation. Autopilot is something that just happens because of the fact that it's easy and it becomes the default behavior. So if we create habits that are highly consistent, that allow us to be on autopilot for really productive behaviors, then that means that we will on autopilot succeed. So imagine if Jack didn't need to require motivation to be really productive. Imagine if Jack got out of bed and he's just so used to starting study that he just starts. And he's like, oh, I can't be bothered thinking about what to do today. I'll just do whatever I usually do. And that's just to study diligently. And he goes to school and thinks, oh, I just can't be bothered thinking about doing anything else. I'll just revise my notes. And then he goes home and he's like, oh, I can't be bothered really doing anything else. I'll just sit and meditate. So Jack would just run on autopilot. His motivation goes up and down, up and down. And it's like, whatever. Your motivation can go up and down, but my productivity is always going to be high because it's not relying on motivation anymore. What we've done is we've separated motivation from the productivity. And therefore, what we've done is we've broken the cycle. Because we're productive without needing motivation, because we're relying on habits instead of motivation. Okay? or instead of relying on willpower. And that is actually how you beat procrastination, because you don't procrastinate if it's a habit. You procrastinate when it takes a lot of effort to do it and overcome it. So ultimately, what we want to do is we want to shift away from this heavily motivation dependent mindset. We want to shift away from this, and we want to shift towards building habits that are weirdly really productive. And you know there are people like this, right? You know, you've heard stories of people that are like, I read an hour every single day, and I always self-study, and I meditate, and I keep myself perfectly optimum, and I always get perfect sleep. And you're like, how do I do it? And you're just like, it's just what I do. It's what I do. It's part of who I am. It's just, I'm used to it. These people have habits, right? And this is a feature that you see in most successful people, is that they have habits of success. Not just dominating willpower, they have habits of success. If you think that you can, over the course of 1 year, every single day for an entire year, drive yourself using purely motivation and willpower to consistently do something to achieve a goal, you're either overestimating your willpower or underestimating the difficulty of the goal. Try to do that for 10 years. Try to do that for 20 years. If you want to have a good life, you're going to need to be in this for the long run. You want to do it with the least amount of effort required, which is turning it into a habit. And so here we've got an important distinction that we can make, which is that we shouldn't be willpower dependent, because willpower dependency creates a phenomenon called willpower exhaustion. And willpower exhaustion is the step that comes just before burnout. Willpower exhaustion is when we have used our willpower reserves. You know, if it's like this tank full of willpower, we have used it every single day, and then there is no willpower left anymore. And this is when it's really, really difficult. When push comes to shove, truly, we have nothing left to give, and we're not able to push back, and we burn out. And then now we need to really take time off because it's urgent. We can't function anymore, and we want to avoid this. And it's extremely, extremely common. Some studies say that 30 to 50% of all adults feel that they have burnt out at some point. 30 to 50%, which means that statistically, you are extremely likely to experience burnout, or at least get close to it. And in my personal experience, I feel that actually about 80% of the students that I've worked with have experienced burnout or were dangerously close to it. So willpower exhaustion is one of the worst things that can happen to you, because when you really need it, you're not going to have any left because you used all of it when you didn't need it. So willpower dependency means that you're relying on willpower. When things get difficult, you try to overcome it using motivation. When something's challenging, your solution is to try harder. When you're procrastinating, your solution is to be more motivated. All right? This is willpower dependency, and this is not sustainable because of this. What we want to be instead is willpower enhanced. What we want is, we want to be relying on habits. We want to be running on autopilot. When things are difficult, we want to get better habits. We want to evaluate the process through which we're trying to solve this problem. And we can, when we need to, actually invest willpower, because our reserves of willpower are always very healthily topped up, because we're very, very rarely taking from it, only when things are very, very difficult. Our solution to when things are really challenging is to evaluate, is to sit and think calmly about the issues and to refine our processes. And procrastination, we don't procrastinate. We don't procrastinate anymore because of the fact that we have habits that take us through that procrastination roadblock. The areas where procrastination would normally stop us, the wall, we can break through that very easily because of the fact that we're not actually slowing down and letting ourselves get distracted. We're not letting ourselves procrastinate. It doesn't happen because it's just a habit to get stuff done and be productive. And this is all very possible. And not only is this possible, this is legitimately how highly successful people are. Personally, I don't know almost anyone who's actually successful that relies on willpower every single day to get stuff done. In every single instance that I can think of, people just have these very powerful habits that just consistently drive them. But these habits don't appear out of nowhere. They weren't born with these habits. The thing with these habits is that they are actually trained. And the thing with the human mind, which is great for us, is that it's actually not that hard to train habits. It's not that hard to train habits. I mean, we see examples of bad habits being trained all the time. Smoking, procrastinating, all of these things, they're bad habits. Okay, so your procrastination, this already is a habit. So you're procrastinating very easily. It's really easy for you to procrastinate. Maybe because, once you sit down at your desk, the first thing that you do is type in FACE, and it's like, oh, look, there we go, I'm already on Facebook. Or you type in YO and then press enter, and then you are on YouTube watching your favorite YouTubers. Or you've taken out your phone, or you're playing a game or something. The idea is that because procrastination is the habit, you're already doing this on autopilot. So you can see the power of habits through looking at your bad habits. But imagine if instead of that, we got rid of all of that and we replaced that with good habits instead. If you sit down at your desk, you're starting to study without even realizing it. That when you get home from school, you're already revising your material without even realizing it because it's just become a habit. So these habits are actually very trainable, and it makes your life much, much easier. It's one of those things, again, and you'd really think that I'd be smarter about this by now, but it's one of those things that I didn't realize for a very, very long time. And honestly, I suffered a lot because of it. And now I legitimately feel that my life is much easier and much more manageable simply because 99% of everything that I do in my daily life that allows me to be highly productive is driven by habit. And I very, very rarely need to draw on any willpower whatsoever, which is why when things get hard, I always know I'm able to overcome it because I'm never really trying very hard. But from what other people are seeing, they would see that I'm always highly productive. And that's because I've fundamentally broken free from this cycle. I've broken that cycle, and the way that you break that cycle is by using habits. So this is the thing about motivation that most people do not understand. This is the thing about motivation that can really change your life. And this is why having plans that require high motivation is fundamentally very unlikely to help you succeed. So let's now look at how we can reduce procrastination by moving away from motivation a little bit, becoming a bit more willpower enhanced and less willpower dependent. And we can see a completely different way of becoming more productive and handling procrastination, a way that most people don't place emphasis on. All right, so let's now have a look at how we can actually reduce procrastination, specifically using this BEDS-M framework. And I've drawn a little bed up here just to make it easier for you to remember it. And this is a, it's just a very small, very simple framework. It's something that's relatively basic. I'm going to go into a more comprehensive framework that many of you may already actually know of anyway, called the peer-peer system later on. But this is something that I think if you're really just a total beginner and you just want to get a handle on procrastination much more quickly, this is just some basic guidelines that you should definitely follow. Now, okay, here's the thing, is that the system that I'm going to teach you, this kind of checklist that you can go through, the BEDS-M checklist, it works. It actually works. And when I say it actually works, I really mean it seriously works. As in, if you do it, you will remove procrastination. It will work. Yet, I get about probably 30% of students not finding success by using this. Okay, so there's about a 30% failure rate on this technique. Yet I'm saying that this, like pretty much, like maybe not 100%, but like 99.9%, this will work. So what's the deal? Why is there a 30% failure rate? Okay, the reason is every single one of these people that fail, without exception, as in across the thousands of students that I've worked with, I have never, ever seen someone who was in this 30% failure rate that actually used it fully. They're usually like, oh, I'll just use the B. Oh, I'll just use the B and then the D. Oh, that should be enough for me. And then a month later, I might email them and say, hey, how's everything going? How's your procrastination? And they're like, oh yeah, no, it didn't really work for me. And then I'll tell them, hey, can you give me your work? Let me review it. What's going on? And they'll send it to me. And it's like, my friend, you have used 40% of the system. Why are you only using 40% of the system? Do you care that little? Are you that unwilling to take control over your life so much that you're willing to just sacrifice all of your productivity for it? So you need to kind of take this seriously, and you need to sort of take yourself seriously a little bit as well, and really be in control of your actions and sort of take ownership for it. Mum's not going to come help you and save you. It's up to you. You're the owner of your own success. And if you're learning a system like this, which like it seriously works, and you just don't apply it fully, or you just do it as the minimum amount of thing. And I know that when you're going through school, there's a tendency to learn to do the minimum amount of work. Okay? The bare minimum that we need to do. But this is not the time to be doing the bare minimum. This is your life we're talking about. Again, it's a skill. It's not a subject. No one's going to assess you on this except for yourself 20 years from now, looking back at whether you regret the way you lived your life. So don't do the bare minimum. Do the maximum. Do your best. Really try hard. Don't just say you're someone that works hard. Actually put the proverbial money where your mouth is, and really sink your teeth into this and give it a go. So anyway, little rant over. Let's get into the BEDS-M system and actually go through what it is. A few pictures to indicate to you what each thing is. You may recognize a few things. You may have ideas about what they are, but let's get into it. So the first thing, the B here stands for burnt ships, or burn the ships. Okay, the burnt ships strategy. Now, there's some interesting history behind this. It comes up in a lot of war manuals. It's come up in a very famous book called Art of War by Sun Tzu, which is, listed as one of the greatest books that's ever written. It's literally a manual for war written by a Chinese war general, like a very long time ago. But this burnt ship strategy, actually, as far as we know, originated from a guy called Cortez. And in summary, what he said was that he was invading a foreign land, and when his soldiers arrived on shore, what he told them was, men, burn the ships. And so they arrived on this foreign land to invade. And what they did is they actually burnt their ships. Why did they do this? They did this so that there was no way out. No way out. There was no chance of escape. So the burnt ship strategy says that if you really want to get something done, you want to make it so that there's no chance for failure. If you screw it up, there's no escape. There's no consolation prize. There's not a lot of times when you're studying and when you're at school where you can like burn your ships. You can't like get to school and say, Mom, I need you to blow up the car now. That's not how it works. It's like you get to school and then you burn your house down. That's not what I'm telling you to do. What I'm saying is that you want to make the consequences of failure higher, something that you truly fear. So let's use a very simple example, okay? You need to go home and you need to study. So let's say that you're planning on studying at 5 p.m. and you want to get 2 hours of solid work done that evening, and you're planning on doing that between 5 to 6 p.m. And then after dinner, maybe you're planning on doing that from 7:30 till 8:30 p.m. That's your goal. This is your goal for the day. Now, if you really want to make sure that you get this goal done, what you might do is you might tell your parents that this is your goal and to check with you afterwards. So here are some ideas. Get your parents to check that you did this. Tell your friends. And you have to send your friends some photos that you've done it. And if you don't send your friends the photos, or if they think, I'm not really sure if you really studied, you might even get them to actually even quiz you so that, they know that you actually sat down and properly learned it. You didn't just cram through and write a bunch of notes. So you might get your friends to do that. And you might say, if I don't, I owe you one massive favor, or you can make me do any kind of dare, and you have to do it. And you've got social punishment if you don't do it. A famous example, there's a YouTuber called Thomas Frank, and he had a burnt ship strategy when it comes to waking up early in the morning. And he rigged up this thing where automatically, if he doesn't wake up and I think turn his alarm off or scan a certain thing in his bathroom or something like that, within, I think 5 or 10 minutes of the alarm going off, it would automatically tweet out something to his lots of followers, where the first 50 people would get given $5 or something like that, or $10. So for him, not waking up early actually meant he's going to lose some hard code cash. So maybe you want to have something like that. Maybe tell your parents, you know what? If I don't do this, I'm going to give you, $50. So a lot of people are very afraid of using the burnt ship strategy. And honestly, when I started using this as well, I was pretty terrified as well, because I was like, wow, I seriously do not want to suffer these I did all of this stuff. I made consequences that were seriously, I will never be able to go out in public ever again. And it was scary, and it worked, because you just do not give yourself the option. So I often say procrastination is one of those things that we give it this big fancy word, procrastination. It's like magic. It's like, oh, it must be like this phenomenon of human psychology. It just exists. It's unescapable. It's the law of the universe. Like the universe itself is sending its energy in order to make me procrastinate. But it's totally not. Procrastination is a very beatable thing. In a way, it's a very modern sort of thing. It's basically our brain saying, I don't want to do anything that's not important. It doesn't want to do anything that's not relevant. Because again, just like how it will forget things that's not relevant and important, if something doesn't seem like it's worth the effort, if you can't see the gain from it, and often, again, because going back to the cave theory, we don't tend to live very long, so short-term gain was actually a lot more important than long-term gain. It's better to make sure you stay alive that week than plan about what you're going to do 10 years from now, because you might not even be alive next year. So our brain is kind of hardwired to really prioritize this short-term gain. So your brain is saying, look, I don't know how much short-term gain I'm getting from this thing, so it doesn't seem like it's very important. So I'm just going to go do something else instead, which is less energy consuming, because these calories are extremely important for me to stay alive. Your brain doesn't realize that there's such a thing as supermarkets now and processed sugar. So because of that, your brain, good on it for trying to keep you safe and alive and not use up all your calories, is saying, this is not worth it, so I'm going to procrastinate. But let's say some crazed killer escapes prison and then holds your whole family hostage and somehow managed to kidnap everyone you've ever met and loved and says, hey, if you don't study, I'm going to torture everyone that you've ever met. You're going to study. You're going to say, okay, screw the brain. Okay, don't tell me it's not important. Everyone's life is on the line. You will have instantaneously just solved procrastination. Okay, or if I said to you,
I want you to wake up at 5:30 a.m. every single day for the next 2 weeks and study for 2 focused hours before you go to school. Every single day. And if you do that, I'm going to give you $10,000 cold hard cash every single day. By the end of the week, you can make $70,000 just by studying for 10 hours that week. So if you do that, you're probably not going to procrastinate, right? So the idea here is that when you use the burnt shift strategy, you're making a decision that you care about your development enough, that you're willing to put yourself under the pump and give yourself serious consequences, and you're not afraid. And the thing is, if you're afraid of the consequences, good. Just don't fail. It's as simple as that, really. So you don't want to make goals that are like ridiculously hard. You don't want to say, okay, I'm going to study from 5 to 6:47, and then at 7:30 to 8:30, I'm going to study exactly, and I only did till 6:46, therefore I need to, suffer the consequence. You want to have goals that are relatively achievable. You want to have goals that are very specific and, relatively simple, but ones that are going to be pretty meaningful still. All the stuff that I've talked about in the previous videos, you want to use those types of goals and that type of scheduling and that type of prioritization, okay? So that's the B, that's the burnt ships strategy that we can use. And then the E actually stands for environment, okay? So what do I have here? What I have here, and it might not be a drawing that's good enough to actually tell what it is, this is meant to be a cookie jar. And so I have this thing that I call the cookie jar effect. And anyone that's come to a seminar or a workshop or course by me has probably heard me talk about the cookie jar effect before. The deal is that I really like cookies, okay? I like a lot of different types of cookies, but there's something about a classic choc chip or a butterscotch biscuit or the Girl Scout cookies with the sugar on top of them. There's something about those cookies that just really does it for me. And I love those cookies. I will eat those cookies like a chain smoker. I wouldn't even wait for myself to finish swallowing. I just cookie after cookie after cookie. And so that's not good for my health and life and my obesity rate. So I don't want to ingest a lot of cookies. But for me, the thing is that if I see a cookie jar on my kitchen top counter, every single day after dinner, I'm going to grab and eat a cookie. And it takes a lot of willpower. Okay, let me say that again. It takes a lot of willpower and a lot of motivation in order for me to avoid eating that cookie. And it's why would I put myself in a situation where I am unnecessarily tempted and relying on motivation to overcome it? Why would I do that when I can actually simply remove it? I have plenty of other things in my life that I need to save my motivation for. Remember, I don't want to use motivation if I don't need to. So the solution is not to overcome and have self-control not to eat the cookie. The solution is not to have cookies, not to have the cookie jar. So the cookie jar effect means that what we're doing is we're going to set up the environment to be conducive of success. If next to your studying desk, you have your phone, and then you've got your PlayStation or your Xbox, and you've got your TV, and then, I don't know, your dog sleeps next to you, and you're time to do some nice relaxing study. And you've got distraction here and here and here, and then out the window, you've got another one. The chances of you actually getting stuff done is much, much lower based on the fact that you now need to use willpower to overcome this and this and this and this and this. So that is a situation where you're using up a lot of willpower just to get stuff done. So remove the cookie jar. Get rid of these cookie jars. Study somewhere else. Put your phone away. Give it to your mom. Make it part of the consequence. Give it to someone else. Use a website blocker so that it's not distracting you. Use an incognito mode, on your browser so that when you go onto YouTube to look for educational content to help you study, you're not met straight in the face by PewDiePie or whoever your favorite YouTuber is telling you to watch his newest recommended video. You got to remember, YouTube is an entire website where they're putting millions of dollars into making you stay on that website and watch video again, again, and again, and again. And the same with things like Netflix. These things are actually created to distract you. So if you're putting yourself right in the line of fire, don't be surprised if you get shot and then end up procrastinating. So use things like incognito, where you're not signed in, where you're not going to have to see these recommended ones. And instead, you just see those random recommended ones that show up when you log in as a guest and you think, who actually watches all these things? When you study, study in a different room entirely. One of my students, actually Olivia, the student that I gave you the story about before, she actually studied in a garage. Yes, literally, she moved a desk into her garage and studied in there because there was nothing else to do. So when you set up your environment, and I've actually mentioned this before, people that have high levels of discipline are equally distractible. Okay? The difference between someone who is very focused and gets a lot done versus someone who is easily distracted and procrastinates a lot is not in how easy they are to be distracted in terms of their own neurology. They are equally distractible. The person that's focused actually spends time to create an environment where the distractions can't even enter in the first place. Whereas a person that's distracted relies on willpower. And yes, it might work for you for a short period of time, but please trust me when I say this, it won't work for you a long time. It's not sustainable. So E stands for environment. Go and look through your environment. Make a list of all the things that are distracting you and go and remove the cookie jars. D goes on from that. D stands for a distractions cheat sheet. So a distractions cheat sheet is a really simple, very easy thing to do. Literally all you're doing is you're getting a piece of paper and you're going to have it next to you while you're studying. Every time you get distracted, you're going to write onto this cheat sheet what it was that distracted you. Okay, what was the distractor? And that means that the next time you can take this information and set up your environment so that distractor is removed. So you might initially think, okay, I've taken my phone away, and you're still getting distracted. What are you getting distracted by? You're getting distracted by your dog. So don't study next to your dog. And I'm sorry, you can't study next to your dog if that's distracting you, because it's more important. You can't take care of your dog if you're too stressed out because you're failing your exams, okay? In order to look after your dog, you need to study away from them. So a distractions cheat sheet, super, super easy. You can look at all the things that are distracting you. And when you get distracted, you write it down. It doesn't always help you in the moment, but it does help you for next time. And actually, one good thing is that sometimes it does actually help you in the moment, because the fact that you have a sheet of paper next to you that is literally tracking your distractions makes your brain more aware of being distracted and therefore makes it less likely for you to be distracted. So all of these three things, when you put them together, they become pretty powerful, and this actually becomes your bread and butter. So I would say that if you just do this well, you will be able to put a cap on procrastination 70 to 80%, which makes a big dent. Now the S simply stands for creating a schedule. And in terms of creating a schedule, you just follow the guidelines of good scheduling that we've already covered. So if you're weak on those, go and review that video because we've already covered those guidelines. So make sure you have a schedule and reflect on them and see how it's going. But it just means that you've got a bit more structure to your week and your day. And the final thing is the M, which stands for minimum viable goals. And this is one of my pride and joys. A minimum viable goal is, okay, this is the definition of a minimum viable goal. It is the easiest and most achievable step towards your goal. Okay? The important word here, or words, is the easiest and most achievable. So a minimum viable goal, by definition, is achievable because it is always easy enough to be achievable. So let me give you an example. Let's say that your goal is to study maths for 2 hours. This is your goal. Okay. Now your brain, again, because it's like, oh, is this really worth it? I don't know if this is going to be giving me the short-term dopamine hit of gratification that eating a massive cheeseburger or playing a game with like bells and whistles and ding ding sounds is going to give me. I don't know if it's worth it. Maybe I'll just procrastinate instead. Your brain is going to think that when it looks at 2 hours, it's like 2 hours and 2 hours, it's going to be that meme where you see that person's face and then like maths is like flying everywhere. Like in 2 hours, I could play the game for like 20 minutes. And then, in that time, I could have actually like done this and I could have done this. And like, I'm losing so much opportunity within this 2 hours. You don't want your brain to think about 2 hours. So what you do is you break this goal down into the minimum viable goals. So instead of 2 hours, you say, okay, well, look, forget about 2 hours. Let's just do 1 hour first. And then after I do 1 hour, maybe I'll feel good and I'll do an hour and a half. And after I do an hour and a half, maybe I'll feel good and I'll do 2 hours. But you know that you're never going to be able to get to doing 2 hours without doing 1 hour anyway. So it's like, all right, I might as well, if I schedule to do 2 hours over here, well, look, I never know if I'm actually going to get it done. Just because I scheduled 2 hours over here, if I procrastinate for an hour and a half, I'm not getting 2 hours of study done, right? That's a given. So I need to make sure I just overcome procrastination. So whatever, I plan to do 2 hours, but really, let's just be happy with doing 1 hour. And after that, maybe I'll feel good and I'll do an hour and a half, and then maybe I'll do 2 hours. So the idea, the hope with this is that we will eventually be able to do the 2 full hours. But you don't want your brain to realize that you're wanting to do 2 hours. You want to tell it like, look, we're not doing 2 hours, okay? Listen to me. Look at me. Look at me. Look at me deep in the eyes. We're only doing 1 hour. Trust me. We're only doing 1 hour. And when we get to 1 hour, you say, look, just 30 more minutes. Pull through. Just 30 more minutes. And then you say, you know what? We're so close. Let's just do 2 hours. And this is what you want to do with your brain. You want to like trick it and lead it on. But actually, 1 hour is a lot as well. So why not actually just focus on doing it for 15 minutes? All right? 15 minutes. And you might think, 15 minutes? I can't do any real study in 15 minutes. That's not the point. That's not the point. You don't have to worry about getting any real study done in 15 minutes because the reality is, if you procrastinate, you don't get any study done in any amount of time. Doing 15 minutes now is at least better than spending 30 minutes procrastinating and not getting anything done and feeling super cruddy afterwards because you just procrastinated your entire life away. So the 15 minutes is not to say we're only doing 15 minutes. It's to say we're going to at least be able to do 15 minutes. And if we're feeling good, maybe we stretch that out to 30 minutes. And maybe if we're feeling good, we stretch that out to 45 minutes. And if we're feeling good, we stretch that to 1 hour. And then maybe that becomes 2 hours because we're leading our brain along. But on the same vein, we can even make this easier. 15 minutes? What about just 2 minutes? What about not even 2 minutes? In order for me to start studying, because that's the hardest part, right? Just getting started. What if all I need to do is sit at my desk with my books out? In fact, what if all I need to do is just sit at my desk? In fact, what if all I need to do is simply stand up from, if you're not at your desk already, if you're on the couch, what if I just need to stand up? In fact, what if all I need to do is look away from whatever I'm doing right now? And this is the minimum viable goal. This is the thing that takes 0.0001% motivation. This is the plan that was on the bottom of the curve. No matter what your motivation is doing, you're always going to have at least enough motivation to just look away. Let's say that you're sitting on the couch and you're watching TV and you're like, I just can't be bothered studying. All right, fine. You can't be bothered studying. Don't study. Look, just look away from the TV. Look away from the TV. Good. Now, all I want you to do is while you're looking away, reach for the remote, just turn the TV off. You can turn the TV back on. All right. Don't worry, brain. We're not going to study. We're certainly not going to study for 2 hours. We're just going to stand up. Okay, we're going to go sit at the desk. As soon as we sit at the desk, I promise, we're going to go back to the couch. All right, brain, listen to me. We're going to sit at the desk and we're going to go back to the couch, turn the TV on. We're going to watch TV again, okay? This is nothing. It's just, we're going to spend 30 seconds, look away, turn the TV off, stand up, sit at the desk, and then we're going to go back. That's it. We're just going to do that. But look, we're at the desk anyway. Let's just get the books out. Let's just get the books out. We'll just get the books out. As soon as the books are out, I'm not even going to put the books away. We're going to go back to the couch and we're going to watch TV again. That's fine. But since the books are out, let's just study for 2 minutes, just 2 minutes, okay? I promise, just 2 minutes, and then we're done. And we're going to go back. I swear on my life, we're going to go back and watch TV again. Look, we've already done 2 minutes. Why don't we do 10 more minutes? Why don't we hit 15 minutes? And then we're going to feel kind of good. We did some study. Why don't we, we've gotten into it. And honestly, by this point, you're going to get to 30 minutes, 45, maybe even an hour. Even if your goal was to ultimately do 2 hours, if you only end up doing 1 hour, or maybe even only 30 minutes, you might think that that's a failure, but it's not. It's not a full win, because a full win would have been 2 hours, but it's almost a win. Because when it comes to procrastination, what is the hardest part? The hardest part is here. The hardest part is starting. We want to train our brain. Remember, we're always thinking about training our brain. We want to train our brain so that we get used to just starting. We want to turn that into finish my sentence, we want to turn it into a habit where we're doing it on autopilot, okay? And by doing this, okay, if we do it one time and we're only able to get to here, it's fine. As long as we started, we trained our brain at least a little bit. The next time we might get to here. But that's good. That's good. Because we trained our brain. And then over time, this becomes easier. It becomes easier, and now it takes very little effort, almost no effort, to at least just start studying. It takes very little effort just to start. Now what we need to focus on is going for a little bit longer, until it's easy to study for 1 hour. What we need to focus on is getting to 2 hours. Until it's easy to study for 2 hours, we need to focus on studying for the entire day. If we want to, which, you don't need to if you study efficiently. So this is the way that it works, is that we're building the habit, we're building it one step at a time. We're saying we can't get to the mountain without having the first step there sorted first. We can't start studying if we're not even at our desk. So there's no point thinking about studying until we're even at our desk. Okay? It's not about what you're able to get done at each step. It's about training our brain to turn the process of just starting into a habit, something that we do on autopilot. And eventually, you won't need to even think about this. Eventually, this will become very easy. And eventually, we won't have to think about it at all. We'll simply be able to sit and start and get into it. And I can honestly say that for me, and a lot of the I Can Study team, and a lot of our students, in fact, as well, we don't procrastinate. We legitimately just never procrastinate because of the fact that we don't require motivation. We have environments that are highly focused. We keep each other accountable. And most importantly, we do the work that we need to do because it's a habit and we're used to it. And we are not creating a habit out of procrastinating. So use the BEDS-M system, and remember, 30% failure rate, but only when you don't use it. And it's extremely rare for me to see someone that used this entire system and still was not able to put a cap on procrastination. Often, what I see is that people they're too afraid of this and they don't do it. Or they don't prep the environment as seriously. They kind of just say, oh, I'll put my phone on my bed behind me. Don't underestimate your ability to procrastinate. You are a professional procrastinator. Be honest with yourself. If you put your bed behind you, you're still going to get up and go get it. You need to put your bed somewhere that you are afraid to go and touch. Okay? So this, environment setup, often people get pretty lazy. They only do like the bare minimum that they can be bothered with the environment. I've had students who, procrastinated a lot, and they completely solved it by literally locking some of their things away. They used to put their phone in a safe and then get their dad to set the password on the safe. So they legitimately couldn't enter it anymore. Website blockers, where if they try to change the setting on the website that they blocked, their friend will get notified and they have to give them like $100. So people get lazy with this. They're too afraid to do it. People do the bare minimum when it comes to setting up the environment. A lot of people will do the distractions cheat sheet because it's just so easy and there's no fear about it. People will try to schedule. Often people don't follow all the guidelines that I gave. They only follow a couple of them and they fall into the same traps and mistakes. But this is one that people really seem to underestimate. They'll say, okay, the minimum viable goal of studying 2 hours is you study for 15 minutes. It's like, no, you missed the point. The point is that the starting is a difficult part. You need to create like 10 different goals before you even start. And then once you've done that, you want to make this part really, really smooth because this is much easier. Going from here to here is much easier than going from here to here. Okay, so don't get lazy. Don't do the bare minimum. Take it seriously. And together, let's just completely crush procrastination, right? Why don't we do that? Let's just absolutely destroy procrastination. And you can look at all the people getting distracted and procrastinating around you and think, man, I used to remember living a life like that. You know, we can completely be beyond that. So the BEDSIM system, a great foundation, good starter, relatively easy as long as you take it seriously. And this will then build onto some of the other systems that I'll teach you later on, which are even more effective than this, which is called the peer-peer system. And there are a lot of similarities. This is probably about a third of the peer-peer system already. So look forward to that. But before that, make sure that you're able to do this.
One of the most important and common reasons for failure is what I call the reversion response to fear. This particular issue is extremely common, but also very subtle. In fact, it's common for people to not realize they have a reversion response to fear unless someone else directly points it out to them. And even then, it can be hard to notice. So I'm going to do my best to talk about what it is, where it comes from, and how to start recognizing and overcoming it. But it's up to you to be really critical and honest with yourself to see if this applies to you. It's probably the most common reason why people will fail to pick up these techniques, and it actually happens to affect more high achievers than low achievers. So the first place to start is to really outline what the process of growth and self-development with these skills actually looks like. We don't often realize this, but when it comes to studying and learning skills, we often have a lot of fixed beliefs and previous experiences around learning that shape the way that we engage in the practice of learning and our beliefs around what we are capable of and how we are meant to learn. Often, these beliefs are actually built purely just on our experiences rather than what may objectively be true. And combined with the fact that most modern formal education systems don't teach about learning science in a practical and effective way in terms of how to study efficiently in ways that really work, or they're using research that is 50 to 70 years outdated, we end up forming a system of studying habits that can actually be fairly detrimental. But the problem is not that they're just detrimental. The problem is that that's all we know. Throughout this course and throughout the entire program and your own learning journey, we're going to teach you a lot of new techniques and perspectives where you will feel a maybe light bulb moment in that, hey, this really makes sense. This explains why I've had all of these issues in the past. However, it's still going to be challenging for you to change your existing habits. It's going to be challenging for you to learn a new technique. It's very common for students to actually feel anxious about using these new techniques, insecure. There are a lot of these what if questions that can pop up. What if I miss something? What if this isn't good enough? What if it doesn't work for me? This is especially the case if we've got exams or assessments coming up, or there's lots of heavy academic pressure and we don't feel like we've got any room to make any mistakes. What if I try practicing this new technique that I've never tried before and it doesn't get me the result? What if I make a mistake here? These are the types of questions that are very common for a lot of our students. And if you don't feel this right now, as you progress through the course, I want you to remember this. Next time you catch yourself feeling this and having these thoughts, I want you to remember back to this lesson. Because this is actually the fear that we're talking about. This is the fear of the unknown. This is the uncertainty, the place where we have to take, in a way, a leap of faith. And in fact, it's so well documented that there are even existing schemas talking about this. So if we look at this here, we can see that we've got the comfort zone in the middle, the fear zone in red, and then the growth zone on the outside. Normally, when we're just going about our day-to-day life, we're existing right in the middle. We're existing in the comfort zone. This is our existing habits. This is the way that we know how to do things. But what we want to achieve is a goal that is challenging. And if a goal is challenging, what that usually means is that it is beyond the scope of our current capabilities and skills. So for example, if our current skill level is right here, and we're trying to achieve a goal that requires us to have this level of skill, then we need to engage in some kind of self-development or some kind of self-improvement that is going to allow us to reach this higher level of skill. If we don't have the necessary level of skill, we're simply not going to be able to achieve that goal. So anytime you've got a challenging goal, like getting a certain exam mark or studying a huge bunch of subjects for an overwhelming topic, or to get admitted into a certain university program, or get a promotion somewhere, or get a job somewhere else, or change your careers, or go back to university after 10 years of never studying. These goals you recognize as challenging because you recognize that there may be a skill gap that you need to fill. And in order to fill that skill gap, we need to grow, which means that we need to expand beyond what we are already comfortable with. And this is the period where we get into the uncertainty. Because in order for us to fill that skill gap, and in order for us to achieve our goal, we need to move past our comfort zone. Goals that are within our comfort zone are things that we are easily able to achieve. Things that we're not easily able to achieve may be out here, or here, or here. And so in order for us to reach that, we need to expand out to hit it. And in doing so, we pass through this part in the middle, which is the fear zone. This is the uncertainty. This is the what if territory, where we're asking ourselves, what if this goes wrong? What if I make a mistake here? This is the part where we start feeling that pressure. And so what's critical in understanding how we can move beyond the fear zone is accepting a few first objective facts and realities. Number one is accepting that your goal is challenging, which means there is a skill gap. Number two, that therefore we will not be able to achieve our goal if we do not develop the appropriate skills, which really means that there's no alternative. We can't bury our head in the sand, hope for the best, keep doing what we've already been doing inside our comfort zone, and just hope that it gets us that goal. Maybe if you're extremely lucky, you'll be able to get there, but for most people, this will not work, and we have to fully accept that. And for many people, simply accepting that carrying on with the way that we're used to, with what we're comfortable with, is not enough to achieve their goal, that in itself is a difficult and challenging idea to accept. And understandably, because now it throws uncertainty wide open. This goal that we think might be really, really important for us, suddenly now we're faced with the reality that it may not be as straightforward or as easy as we thought it was, or that we let ourselves believe. But if we really care about achieving this goal, then it's not about closing our eyes, crossing our fingers, hoping for the best. It's about doing everything we can to create a process and a plan so that we can reach the goal, so that we get the outcome that we want. But then the question here might be, well, if I need to gain these skills, do I necessarily need to pass through this fear zone? Is it actually necessary? Is there a comfortable path that I can travel down where I'm not exposed to uncertainty and fear, while at the same time developing the skills? And that is a very valid question. Unfortunately, the answer is, in short, no. And the reason is simple. The reason we feel the uncertainty, which gives rise to the anxiety and the insecurity and the fear, is because we are taking existing beliefs, knowledge structures, something that is in place and solid and crystal, and we are breaking that open. We are challenging our existing thoughts and our existing ideas. We're challenging our existing systems and our existing habits. We're challenging what we already believe is the way to do things. And in order to do that, we need to open up to the idea that maybe the way we're doing things is not the right way. The process of growing involves us unlearning, being open-minded and breaking open what we already assume and believe to be true. That in itself directly causes uncertainty and insecurity. Because if what we thought was true is not true, then what is true? Hence, there's no way we can bypass the uncertainty, unfortunately. There is no road that is thornless on the path towards growth. The fear zone is everywhere around the comfort zone. In fact, the comfort zone exists because of the absence of fear. Everything that does not have fear in it is technically within the comfort zone. The fear zone is in itself the boundary between comfort and growth. There is no way to avoid passing through it, which is that third fact. The objective reality we need to understand is that the fear zone is unavoidable. In fact, it is so unavoidable that this has its own entire field of research. There is a concept that is commonly referred to as desirable difficulty. This is the idea that when you are learning a new skill or acquiring new knowledge, there is a certain level of difficulty associated with it. Think about it like going to the gym. If you're going to the gym and you're lifting some weights, you want the weights to be a little bit heavy. You want to be challenged because you understand that the heavier weight is helping you grow your muscle. If it's too heavy, you're not really getting a workout. Whereas if it's too light, you're not really getting a workout. And so we want that part in the middle where it's strenuous and challenging enough and therefore stimulating growth. The same thing for our brain and our mind is that we want to have a challenge, a path that is challenging enough that it forces our brain to reprogram and retrain those neural pathways and the way that we think. Now, the science is still out on exactly how this reprogramming thing actually really works, but we are pretty sure there's something going on in there. We don't know exactly what yet, but we do know that there has to be a sufficient pressure to force your brain to change the way that it thinks, especially if you want to change it at a habitual, fundamental level. It seems that in order for you to grow and develop new skills, you need to engage in putting yourself under a certain level of load and pressure. And part of that pressure comes naturally from proceeding through the fear zone. You may have heard of the saying, no pain, no gain, or short-term pain, long-term gain. A lot of people misinterpret that. They think it's just about putting their head down and putting in the work, doing more hours, going to sleep later than everyone else. But that's not it. Hard work is not just about doing more of the same thing. Hard work is doing the thing that is hard. It is doing the hard work. It is doing the work that other people aren't willing to do. It's about pushing through discomfort. It's about thinking about new and better ways of using your effort and using your time. It is the work that most other people are not willing to put in because they are too preoccupied with doing what is easy, which is to just put in more hours. And when it comes to learning, this is a universal finding. In fact, students across the board have been found to react so negatively to this difficulty and discomfort and uncertainty and fear that there is an entire phenomenon called the misinterpreted effort hypothesis. Now, it's not restricted just to students and studying, but it's seen here extremely commonly. What happens is that students universally, in fact, it's scarily consistent finding across the research. There's not many things that have been found in the research that are as consistent as this. If a student uses a technique and that technique feels more difficult, then they are less likely to use that technique because the judgment has been made, usually subconsciously, that this technique is not as good. And it's called the misinterpreted effort hypothesis because actually the techniques that use greater effort actually tend to be the ones that are more effective. It's kind of like how the workout that's a little bit more challenging tends to be the workout that does you more good and makes you fitter. But not everyone reacts negatively to the fear zone. Not everyone reacts negatively to effort. And this is where the field of research and study called growth and fixed mindset comes in. So the growth mindset is a very popular, well-known term, and it refers to the mindset and perspective that a person has when they're engaging in self-development. People with a growth mindset tend to exhibit certain behaviors that predispose them to growth, which means they're more likely to succeed. People with fixed mindsets do the opposite. They hold themselves back. So here are some behaviors of growth and fixed mindsets to get you started. We're actually going to cover this in more depth later in the course, but I'm giving you a small introduction to the idea so that you can start thinking about where you fit in. Growth mindset accepts challenges. Fixed mindset avoids challenges. Growth mindset embraces making mistakes because there is a lot of learning to be had when you make mistakes. Fixed mindset is afraid of making mistakes. They go out of their way to avoid making mistakes. Growth mindset reacts positively to making mistakes and failure. When they don't do well in something, they think more about why and how they didn't do well and what they can do to improve next time. They see it as a process and a journey rather than just a single outcome. Fixed mindset is usually more obsessed about the single outcome rather than thinking about what can be done better or differently next time in a critical and objective way. They tend to think more about just, this didn't go well, I don't feel good about this, I'm stressed, I'm overwhelmed, what do I do, what do I do, what do I do, without actually really sitting down and thinking about it more productively. Growth mindset tends to get bored when doing the same challenge over and over again that they know they can already do. Fixed mindset tends to repeat challenges that they already know they can do because it helps them feel better about not making mistakes. Growth mindset is more likely to be honest about mistakes that they make and their failures. Fixed mindset is more likely to lie to protect their self-image about the person that doesn't make mistakes and doesn't have failure. You can see that people in the fixed mindset are very focused on the outcome. They're very averse to mistakes and very averse to failure. Unfortunately, there's no way around it, especially going through this course and the skills that you're going to learn. There is no way that you can learn these without making a certain number of mistakes. But it doesn't mean you're going to make all of them. There are a certain number of mistakes that you're more likely to make. And the sooner you realize what mistakes you're going to make, the sooner you're going to be able to progress and move forward and learn from those mistakes. You don't want to put off making the mistakes until much later, only to then realize you don't even have any time or energy left to work on improving them. That's the worst case scenario. One of the most common behaviors that we see with people that have a more fixed mindset when it comes to studying and learning and self-development is that they ask a lot of what-if questions. Hypothetical, what should I do? The theme here is that they're trying to ask questions and get information about what they should do because they're afraid of making a mistake or failing by just giving it a go. People with a growth mindset, on the other hand, don't ask a lot of questions like that. They tend to just give it a go to the best of their knowledge, and they ask, how did I do? That's the two different perspectives. And it's actually startling the difference in progress that we see. Very legitimately, a student with a growth mindset that just gives it a go, accepts they're going to make mistakes for the first 10 to 20 times, and asks for feedback, can progress through and develop their skills at a rate that is potentially 10 to 20 times faster than someone with a fixed mindset. And the reason is because there are so many ways you can make mistakes. If you ask a question like, well, how should I do this? Or what should I do before giving it a go first and making those mistakes? There are so many hypothetical ways that could be answered that by the time you go to actually do it, you're trying to avoid making so many mistakes. You just make another set of mistakes. And now you're no better off than you would have been if you just went and gave it a go to begin with. In fact, you're probably even more confused or more frustrated because you put in all of this preparation to avoid making a mistake, but you ended up making one anyway. So let me be the one to tell you, there is no way to avoid making mistakes when you're learning these skills and going through the course. So throw yourself in there and make those mistakes as early on as possible. Don't just traverse through the fear zone. Learn to swim in the fear zone. Learn to live in the fear zone. Learn to accept that uncertainty and that discomfort is actually a sign that your brain is growing. It's actually a sign that your brain is not crystal and concrete, and it's now open to new ideas, and it's ready to incorporate and consolidate new skills and techniques. It's in a more fluid state. It's in a better state for learning. And over time, you will actually start to feel more comfortable and confident in that state. And you will actually enjoy being in that state. You will start thriving from that type of feeling. It will no longer have a negative connotation. As you just continue to immerse yourself in that and you see firsthand the growth that occurs when you're not afraid to just give things a go. Now, I'm not going to go into where fixed and growth mindsets come from right now. We talk about that later on. There's a lot of stuff that happens in childhood that predisposes people to having more fixed mindsets, especially if you had a lot of pressure growing up, and especially if the outcome or being perfect was a strong focus from your parents or your environment or your culture or whatever it is. And it's quite complicated to get into. We will go into that more later on in the course, as well as in the Higher Ground series. But for now, I'm just going to give you a few tips to help you navigate through this fear zone a little bit more confidently. Number one, recognize when you're about to ask a question that is a what if question. Remember, it's much better to do it to the best of your ability, expect mistakes to occur, and then ask for feedback than to say, well, what if this and what if this and what if this? You need to recognize that. And people with a very strongly habituated fixed mindset can often be completely unaware of that. And that can hold you back a lot. I have students that I've worked with that have been on the course for 8 to 9 to 10 months, and they've almost not improved their skills at all because the amount that they've actually practiced is tiny compared to the amount that they really should have, because they've been holding off on practicing until they feel like they're going to get it right, and they never do. For this type of student, they may and ah and question about it for an entire week before giving it a go for 30 minutes and then thinking, oh, this is not going to plan, abandon. And then they don't learn anything from it. In that same week, someone with a growth mindset could have given it a go 5 or 6 times and be 5 or 6 times ahead of where this other student is. You can see now why improving 10 to 20 times faster is not really that hard if you have a growth mindset compared to a fixed mindset. So that's the first thing. Be aware of the questions that you tend to ask or that you feel the urge to ask. Are you trying to get information to avoid making a mistake? Or are you willing to just give it a go and ask for feedback afterwards? Number 2, expect failure. Not just accept failure as part of the process of learning, which is true, but actually expect it. The skills that we're going to teach you through this course are frankly very challenging. And as a result, you are going to fail many, many, many times. But the only way that you can lose is if you don't give it a go and if you don't make those mistakes in the first place. In that case, you haven't learned the skill, and you also haven't learned about how to do it either. You've not only failed in being able to use the skill at competency, and you've also failed in gaining information and learning about how to eventually do it correctly. All you've learned about is the hypothetical solution to a hypothetical question or a hypothetical what if. Again, it doesn't make a difference. The only way that you learn is if you just don't give it a go. If you give it a go, there's no way you lose. You either do it right or you learn one way not to do it. And that increases the chances of success in the next attempt. So we're going to take this idea of expecting failure one step further. And what I want you to actually start implementing is a technique that I call practice blocks. So practice blocks are dedicated blocks of time where the objective is not to do the technique correctly. So it goes like this. You'll learn some technique from the course, the stuff that you've already learned so far. There's actually quite a few techniques in there that you've already learned. And as you go through the rest of the course, you're going to learn lots of new techniques. Take just one or two of those and then set aside maybe 30 minutes to a couple of hours where you have some material that you want to study and try to practice using that technique. The trick here is that you're not going to try to necessarily do it successfully. If you do happen to do it successfully, good for you, but the point here is to figure out what mistakes we tend to make. Remember, I said that there are hundreds of mistakes that you could make, but you're probably only going to make 4 or 5 or 6 of them as you learn it. We want to figure out what 4 or 5 or 6 mistakes you're going to tend to make so that we can start fixing that as soon as possible. So have a sheet next to you that you're going to use for reflection. Have your dedicated practice time, and the point there is to do your best with using the technique, and afterwards evaluate how it went and really look for where you think the mistakes were. Look deeply. Don't just think about this mistake, this mistake, this mistake. This went wrong, or this felt bad, or this felt bad. Really look for some of those trends. Did you make these 3 mistakes fundamentally for the same reason? Was it the same kind of habit or the same perspective or same assumption that led you to make these different types of mistakes? Try that. If you're struggling, you can even send that through and ask for feedback from our team or from your peers. And you can even get insights that you wouldn't be able to get by yourself. That's one of the best things about having a community and a support team around you. I would recommend having at least 2 hours of dedicated practice blocks per week. This is a safe, dedicated time that you have set aside specifically for learning a new technique and making mistakes. The only way you lose is not doing it. And if you don't walk away from that session with a reflection on the mistakes that you've made, you should frankly be kind of disappointed actually, because that's a learning opportunity for you that you weren't able to take hold of. So we're really gonna be in that super growth mindset here and embracing the idea of making mistakes and failure to the point where we deliberately work it into our system. So in these practice blocks, and it can be really as short or as long as you want, depending on your time availability. Like you could have 5 to 10 hours of practice blocks per week. That would be totally fine. Or you could, if you don't have any time at all, you could maybe do just 30 minutes a week. Less than 30 minutes, probably you need to free up a little bit more time. But during this time, just remember, the intention here is to find the mistakes. That is your goal. It is not to do the technique correctly. As a result, it actually doesn't even matter what you're studying. You could be studying content that's relevant for your day-to-day study. That's fine. I mean, it's like 2 birds with 1 stone because you're spending that time studying and you can get through it. Or you could just study something completely random. You could use a Wikipedia article. You could just study some random thing that you've always wanted to learn about. Again, it doesn't really matter. The purpose here is to identify mistakes and patterns in your technique. So what you're practicing on is irrelevant. If you wanted to use that time and get those 2 birds with 1 stone, then you can use the material that you're studying on a daily basis. That's okay. But don't worry if you feel like you didn't study it properly or whatever it is. Remember, that's not the point. The point is to figure out mistakes in your technique. If you feel like it didn't go well, you can just always go through that material again. Now, the best thing about this is that not only will it help you figure out mistakes in your techniques and therefore help you to improve your skills much, much faster. But actually, as you continue to immerse yourself in just making these tiny little mistakes on such a regular basis, you will, if you have a very fixed mindset, slowly start to train that out. You will start to slowly become more accepting and embracing of the idea of making mistakes, because you will be able to see firsthand the massive difference that it makes when it comes to being able to grow and develop your skills. So we covered a lot of points, and let me summarize. There is a comfort zone made up of our existing beliefs and habits. In order for us to achieve a challenging goal, we need more and better skills. And to achieve those skills, we have to navigate through this fear zone, and that is unavoidable. In order to navigate through this fear zone, it's going to require effort. It's going to require resilience and diligence and determination and some grit. Most people, based on the misinterpreted effort hypothesis, when they encounter resistance and difficulty, they respond negatively to it and they draw away from it, instead doing what's easier, like just working for more hours, rather than really challenging themselves to change the way that they're doing things. People that are able to access growth more effectively have what we often call a growth mindset, while people that struggle with this have more of a fixed mindset. One of the most common characteristics of a fixed mindset is being afraid to fail and make mistakes. So with that in mind, use those techniques that I've just taught you and start implementing them straight away. Don't wait. In fact, if you feel like you should do this later, maybe you have a fixed mindset. Maybe that's a cue for you to do it right now. An extremely high-risk way of going through this program and learning these skills is rushing. The system that we've created and the techniques that we've created are very complex. They are not something that you will be able to pick up in a very short period of time. The techniques we teach you in the high yield phase and these fundamentals, they're relatively quick. You can pick them up in a matter of hours to days, or at most a couple of weeks of practice. The things in the growth phase, we have some of the highest achieving students in the world, top 0.001% students, ranking first, second, and third internationally. Postdoctoral students, still taking 4 to 6 months to learn how to do the techniques. And this is them really trying very hard. Now, the thing is that you don't have to be discouraged. The path is there for you. It's just that that path is difficult for everyone that walks down it. It was difficult for me trying to figure it out by myself. It took me several years and tens of thousands of hours and thousands of iterations and more mistakes than you can even count to figure it all out. For you, it will be a fraction of the effort and a fraction of the time and a fraction of the number of mistakes. But a fraction of a lot is still a little bit of a lot. So there's going to be some effort. There's going to be some time that it takes for you to learn a lot of the growth phase techniques. Throughout the course, there are lots of points where it says, don't do this too quickly, practice a certain amount, don't rush this. We have activities that we recommend that you do, certain amount of time that you should spend on a certain lesson. It's very clear as you go through the course. It's all laid out there for you. And ironically, there are a group of students that tend to ignore that advice. And this group of students are the rushers. And these rushers tend to have essentially the same problems. They're very predictable problems, actually. They will get through the course 2 to 3 months into the course. They'll submit something for feedback. And then while they submit for feedback, they'll be informed that their technique is frankly terrible. That they have reaped only maybe 5% of the benefit of the techniques. Usually these students are feeling very confident with their level of work. They're usually feeling, like they've learned a lot and they've got a high level of mastery. And there's a very strong relationship between the amount you know and how confident you are. And this has been demonstrated across multiple fields of research. The most famous version of this, which is called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which basically says that the less you know, the more confident you tend to be. But there's variations of this and other types of findings that essentially say the exact same thing, which is that when you don't have a lot of expertise, you think that you're really good at something. So the dangerous thing is that you wouldn't be aware of it. If you were the person that went through and rushed the course, you would genuinely not realize that you screwed up, because you would not have the insight and knowledge to know enough that you had actually screwed up. So it's actually impossible to know unless someone else tells you. And that's usually what happens. 2 or 3 months in, someone will tell them. Now, at that point, you might think, well, they've gone through, they've got a big picture understanding of all the techniques in the course, blah, blah, blah. So now they can go through and start fixing that. That's not actually the case. It's kind of like if you had no instructions and someone said, build a house. And then you were like, okay, I'm just going to build a house. And you really quickly built this house. You just Googled some things, you watched some YouTube videos, and you built a house. And then in the building inspection, it fails the building inspection. And it says, your plumbing is terrible, your electric work is terrible, the walls are terrible, the paint is toxic, the walls aren't set up correctly, the roof is leaking, everything is non-compliant. You essentially need to pretty much rebuild this house. At that point, it would actually take more work, and it's more confusing to realize where and how and why you made a mistake than it would have been to just literally do it properly the first time. And so for these students that rush through the course 2 or 3 months later, they actually end up having to spend maybe an additional 2 or 3 months literally just unlearning the things they learned incorrectly, so that they have the opportunity to start from zero. Let me say that again. It takes them 2 or 3 extra months just to start all over again, because your brain doesn't have a reset button. If you screw it up, we can't just be like, okay, that didn't work, let's load it from the last save point and just try it again. It doesn't work that way. By that point, you'll have consumed more information. There are more variables. Instead of it being a cleaner canvas to work with, we now have multiple other variables that are making the picture more confusing. The reason you make a mistake is no longer very simple. And for us to give feedback on it, it is much more confusing, to the point where it's almost impossible. Because instead of 4 or 5 or 6 mistakes that you've made that led you to this picture, it could now be legitimately 12, 15, 20, 30 possible mistakes, because we don't know how much of the later stuff was in your mind, maybe subconsciously affecting you when you're trying to do the technique. It's extremely complicated to do that. And in fact, most people that rush through the course, they will eventually just give up and they will never learn the technique. That's actually, frankly, the case. It is extremely, extremely rare for someone to rush through the course and then be able to pick themselves up off the floor again. We have a few of these phoenixes that are in the course, and if you go through the Discord and you see some of the messages, you'll see that there are like these long comments and posts from people that went through and rushed, and then they're coming back to tell new students, please don't make the mistake that I made. And we're not telling them to do this. They're of their own volition out there making these posts, just warning other people not to make these mistakes. It is serious, and this is a rarity. People rushing through the course and not really taking it properly is pretty common. And if you were to take a group of like 100 of these people, 99 of them, actually no, all 100 of them will actually fail to use the technique correctly. In the thousands of students we've taught across the world of all different ages and ranges and stages, we've never actually had someone that's rushed through and learned it correctly. Never, like not even once, ever, to the best of my knowledge. So if we were to take that group of 100, 90 of them would just quit. And then 10 of those have the willpower and the grit, I guess, to say, okay, I screwed up, let me go back again. None of them do better than the people that just went through slowly. Yeah. So it's very much a case of the, tortoise and hare situation, but except the tortoise just absolutely completely dominates the hare without any possible chance of the hare ever in any universe doing better than the tortoise. So please do not rush. Now, there are actually 2 different ways that you can rush. Most people, when I say don't rush, they think about it just in terms of time. So for example, if we say, hey, you should spend maybe a month or so at fundamentals, then they might say, okay, cool. Well, I've spent 2 months at fundamentals, so I should be all good to go. And that makes sense, but actually it's more complicated than that, because there is another way to rush, which is simply getting insufficient practice. So what's important is actually not the passage of time. It's what you're doing in that time. For example, if 2 months have passed, but you haven't actually practiced any of the techniques at all, it's really the same as no time has passed. So what's important here is actually getting sufficient practice in. And likewise, you could spend 2 weeks at a certain lesson instead of 1 month, but you might be practicing 10 hours a day, in which case it might be okay for you to move on. This is the reason why feedback is very important, because it takes an experienced eye to say, yep, I think it's okay for you to move on. And it's important for you to be honest with yourself as well. So we have the practice predictor, we have various tools that allow you to figure out how much you need to practice, but the rule of thumb is that for every single technique that you learn, you should try to get to a level of competency where you're not having to try very hard to do it correctly anymore, which actually means a few things. Number one, you actually need to know what correct looks like. Again, feedback is important here. There are examples that are given, and there are more examples as you go later on throughout the course. But there are examples, but there's only so much you can infer from an example, especially in these early stages, because in the early stages, people come into the course with all sorts of different types of techniques. And there are many, many different errors and misconceptions that people tend to have. Throughout the high yield phase, a lot of that stuff kind of gets squeezed out and fixed. So an example of someone moving in the right direction for one person might be completely different for someone moving in the right direction for another person. Yes, 2-3 months from now, they're going to look, more similar because they're applying the same fundamental principles. But at the beginning, we're just trying to get you closer and closer to a good point, which is why feedback is just much faster and more effective than just having examples to look through. I mean, you'd have to look through hundreds of examples to get a good idea of whether what you're doing is correct or not. But you want to get that feedback, understand whether you're on the right track, and then get to the point where you can replicate that type of success without really having to try too hard. Now, the thing is that you need to do this for every single technique because learning is not a single isolated thing. It happens in systems. And so if you have one technique that you can use, and then you have another technique that you can use, when you do both techniques at the same time, it doesn't mean that you can actually straight away do it correctly. For each new technique that gets added on, each technique influences each other. So if you've got 3 techniques, they're all influencing each other. You could have 3 to 4 techniques that individually you can use each of these techniques with good accuracy. And when you try to do all 4 of them simultaneously, it can feel like learning to walk all over again. So every time you add a new technique onto your system, you need to test the whole system again to make sure it's still stable. It's one of the things that beginners often overlook, and then it implodes on them because a month down the line, they look back, they've learned like 12 new techniques, they've practiced each one only in isolation without integrating it into their everyday system. And then for the first time, they try doing it all together and it just completely crumbles. They fail on all fronts, and that's very demotivating. So lots and lots and lots and lots of practice, right? Take a little bit of theory, do a lot of practice. If you follow that, then you should be relatively in good stead. And the general rule of thumb that we give here is that 1-to-5 ratio, is that for every hour of theory, you will need at least 5 hours of practice for what you learned in that theory. Later, in the more advanced stages, you may learn 1 hour of theory, and you might actually need to practice like 40 to 100 hours just for that 1 hour of theory, partly because we teach in like a lot in a short period of time, and also because later on the techniques become more advanced. So that's another reason why before you get into the growth phases, the fundamentals and the high yield stuff needs to be super, super dialed in. Like you need to have a high level of competency with the fundamentals. Otherwise you will really struggle. I mean, you may go through 1 hour in the growth phase and you might need 200-300 hours of practice to be able to learn it if the fundamentals are shaky, because it's really hard to think about why something isn't happening correctly if it was because of 14 steps back, there was this thing that was the weakness. This is that very sequential method that I told you about before, is that it does require very strict step-by-step progression to make sure that you're not running into errors. Now, I'll leave you with one thing that I think is very ironic. You know how I said that these rushers are essentially the sort of group of people and they all make very similar mistakes? The ironic thing is that every rusher will listen to this, and what they think is, I'm different. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I'm different, you're a rusher. The final reason why people don't tend to learn a lot of these techniques correctly is because of what we call selective learning. So as you go through the program, you'll notice that there are a lot of techniques. And in fact, some people get to the end of fundamentals and say they didn't really learn much, but there is a lot of techniques there. You have to go through it very carefully. Selective learning is when someone will look at something and they will decide that they are not going to practice that because they make a judgment that it's not relevant for them. And this could be due to a number of reasons. The first reason, which is quite strange, but I've noticed this quite commonly, is that sometimes someone will go through and learn about a technique, and because they've never heard of this technique before, they think this is not relevant to them. It's sometimes because they're looking for something. They have a kind of already existing belief about how learning is meant to be. And therefore, when they're going through, they're kind of just trying to confirm that their idea is valid. So anything that isn't talking about what they think is sort of disregarded, and anything that does say what they think is kind of anchored onto. That's very dangerous and actually extremely illogical, because you don't know what you don't know. And if you're joining this because you wanted to gain, this expertise, then it's just not a smart decision to ignore the expertise, I don't really know another way to explain that. It's just, I feel it's just really obvious. Just don't ignore the advice that you paid for. So don't go through and just disregard things because it doesn't fit the mode of what you already thought. And don't disregard things because you've never heard of it. Maybe the reason you haven't heard of it is because of just the fact that it's not common, and maybe that's the thing that you need. All of the techniques that we teach, every single one has been field tested. We don't teach anything that's only theory. We never teach anything that is only in the research. Nothing makes it into the course unless there's been extensive testing with real students in real authentic environments where we know that it consistently produces success. Holding accountability for the advice that I give is something that I put on a pedestal. So you can trust that the techniques that you're going to learn and have already learned are ones that we know work in the real world, in real world environments, not like the perfect artificial lab setting, where nothing else goes wrong. The reason that selective learning is such an issue is because, especially in the earlier stages, the techniques that you learn in the early stages are very rarely going to be the final version of the technique that you learn. And in many cases, the techniques that you learn in the fundamentals are component techniques of something that becomes a composite technique. So a component technique is a technique that in itself is not complete. However, it doesn't mean that it's useless. Like a component technique can in itself be a technique that produces a specific outcome, like a note-taking technique or a technique for you to use in lectures or in class or in meetings. This is stuff that you can use and you can get an immediate benefit from. The reason we call it a component is because it doesn't integrate fully with all the other techniques that are there. It doesn't produce the full effect of what it could produce. Component techniques can come together in like some weird sort of like Digimon combining like polymerization sort of thing to create a composite technique. A composite technique is, as it sounds, a composite. So it means that it's comprised of multiple component techniques. They're more advanced techniques. They're all taught in the growth phases and beyond. However, in order to be able to use a composite technique, you need to have mastery over each of its components. The reason selective learning is relevant here is because it's not going to be clear to you what techniques are components and how it integrates with other techniques, because it's frankly extremely complicated to try to explain it for every single technique. So in the fundamentals, 95% of everything that's taught in the early high yield phase of the course is in some way a component technique, where the failure to have good level of mastery over it would mean that you are unable to learn a later, more advanced technique. Just trust that it's going to be necessary for a later stage, especially if it's something that you're not already fairly good at or you're not using. It's extremely important that for new techniques that you're not already using, that you practice those, because those are much more likely to be core component techniques later on. Now, in some cases, certain techniques legitimately won't be relevant to your particular scenario. Like, for example, if you never attend classes or lectures and all of your learning is purely through written material, then the techniques for what you do in class are not going to be techniques that are directly relevant. But the catch is actually that there are methods of thinking for example, in that example, the in-class techniques that we teach in fundamentals, there are methods of thinking that you would need to practice in order to use more advanced techniques later on, even if you were to consume that information in a written format. So the situations in which you can actually legitimately, truly skip a technique are very, very rare. So if you're wondering about whether you can skip something, the best thing to do is actually just to ask us. Tell us about your situation and say, is it okay for me to skip this? And we'll let you know. In most cases, the answer is no. But if you think your situation truly is fairly unique, then sure, you can let us know. But the blanket rule would just be, learn everything that we teach you. Please do not skip things, especially things in terms of how to approach the course. Remember, these are the things that I spent years figuring out that made the success rate of people learning this go from less than 1% to over 80%.